Hello, everyone. I'm Robin Steffen. I'm the Senior Advisor to the Deputy Director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, and welcome to another White House We the Geeks Google Plus Hangout. As the President travels to Africa this week, we wanted to highlight individuals from around the world who are bringing science, technology, and innovation to bear to improve the lives of the poor in developing countries around the world, what we're calling innovation for global good. And as you follow along today, we hope you will post comments and questions on Twitter using the hashtag #WeTheGeeks, and we'll be sure to get some of those questions answered. I'm here at the White House today with the U.S. Agency for International Development Chief Innovation Officer Maura O'Neill, who you'll hear from in just a moment. But first, I want to turn things over to my boss, Tom Khalil, who is joining today's Hangout from the West Coast. Tom?
Great, and thanks everyone who's tuning in, and make sure you tweet us your questions at hashtag #WeTheGeeks. And we're going to kick things off by asking the participants to introduce themselves and say a word or two about what they're up to, starting with Alex.
Thanks, Tom. I'm Alex Swanay. I'm the Executive Director of Evidence Action. I'm sitting today in the basement of one of the House of Representatives office buildings, about to go and testify about how cost-effective school-based deworming is. That's another one of the interventions that we support, besides the chlorine for dispensers for safe water that I'll be talking about here today. Thanks for the invitation, and I'm happy to hear everybody's questions.
Great. Okay. Brian.
Yes, I'm Brian Shah. I'm with Miragaon Power. We're calling in from Delhi. We work in India, where we're providing solar lighting utilities to rural off-grid villages. To date, we've got over 8,000 customers in 370 villages.
Great.
And I'm Nikhil Singani. I'm Brian's business partner.
Super. Maura from USAID.
Hi, I'm Maura O'Neill. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at USAID, and my job is to imagine the conditions where aid is no longer needed. That's what President Obama asked us to do, and to source and scale game-changing innovations.
Great. And Vineet.
Hi, Tom. Thank you. My name is Vineet. I'm in London. I'm an investment director for Omidyar Network. We are an organization set up back in 2004 by Pam and Pierre Omidyar, and our mission is to help people maximize the opportunities that they have in life so that they can make the most of the abilities. We believe everybody has ability, and so it's about getting people opportunity. That's us.
Super. So Maura, I'm going to ask you to kick things off by telling our viewers a little bit about the Development Innovation Ventures program, which you helped to lead at USAID.
Great. Well, when the president was elected, he looked around and, as I said he created the first policy directive on development, and he said, let us imagine the conditions where aid's no longer needed. And we believe fundamentally that great ideas come from all different places. They come from Delhi, they come from Ohio, they come from South Africa. And so we said, where's the places that continue to source and scale innovation again and again and make just huge breakthroughs in our lives? One we know is Silicon Valley, using an angel investing venture capital, and the other is drug discovery, for which 100 years ago, if I had an idea of what I thought might help, I'd put it in a bottle and I'd get a pickup truck and I'd hawk it around, but nobody had any idea whether it was effective, whether it worked. So what we did is we said, let's take all those lessons and let's apply them to development. So Michael Kremer, a Harvard economist, and I'm a tech entrepreneur by background, said, let's develop a system for making small bets on big ideas that could scale without long-term U.S. taxpayer support. Let's make bigger bets on ideas where we could create evidence and build to scale. And then only after that's happened could we go to stage 3 and say, okay, now we have evidence, now we know what it's going to cost, now we know the impact, and let's blow this out in a country, all over a country, and start in 2 or 3 others. So we started a couple years ago. We've had 3,000 applicants. We've made 60 investments, and we've already had a number of them go to scale without continued USG support. So we're really excited about the div entrepreneurs that we have in the Google Hangout today, Tom.
Great. And so when you talk about scale, what are some past examples that really drive home what you're talking about. What are you talking about? Millions of people, tens of millions of people? What are some examples of development interventions that have really scaled to that point?
So Muhammad Yunus in Bangladesh led a group of women $25 to see if they could actually have some working capital for their businesses. 30 years later, it is across the world, somewhere between 30 and 90 million people, depending on how you calculate it, are benefiting from microfinance on a method that he pioneered. So on average, we're looking for millions and tens of millions. So microfinance is one of them. The Green Revolution, it saved hundreds of millions of people. USAID worked with Norman Borlaug and others in the early years, and is known as is why Asia is thriving today, is because we stopped the extreme poverty and the death from malnutrition. And a third one is oral rehydration. We know that there's a lot of dirty water around, and particularly in disasters. And so just actually taking some oral rehydration has dramatically saved millions of babies' lives around the world. So those are just 3 examples, Tom, and we know there's many more to come. We know insecticide bed nets is something that today is being scaled all over Africa and is saving the lives of millions of children and adults as well.
Great. Well, that's a great segue to Alex, who has been working on cost-effective interventions for safe drinking water. So why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about what you've been up to and why you're so excited about it.
Thanks a lot, Tom. We're really excited about chlorine dispensers for safe water. We've all known for a long time that chlorine really helps to treat drinking water, and that if you add chlorine to drinking water, it can reduce child diarrhea illnesses. The challenge in developing countries where people don't get water through pipes into their house has always been figuring out how can we make it easy and convenient for people to chlorinate their water. You can give people little bottles of chlorine, sure, but then they have to remember to put that into their water every day by themselves. The same way for us, it's hard to remember to brush your teeth. It's hard to remember to chlorinate your water. The innovation that we are so fortunate to have supported by DIV, and let me be clear, this is a grant made to Innovations for Poverty Action, is a change in the form factor. Rather than chlorinating water in the home, we've figured out a way to support people to chlorinate water when they collect it, which means when it's salient, when it's on their mind, and when it's convenient. And we've dramatically reduced the cost of water treatment as a result of this. With the support of DIV, Innovations for Poverty Action will be serving 5 million people by 2015. And we anticipate that we will further scale this up by 2017, 2018. We've got a goal of serving 23 million people. We really want to meet the kind of ambitious targets that Mara is talking about. And it's been technological innovation that's allowed us to be confident about doing this.
Right.
Can I just add one exciting thing about that? The dispenser that they use at the site is made in Nairobi, and the valve is made in Minneapolis. And so I think it's what's exciting about is combining some of these things globally that makes for these kinds of interventions.
Right. And Alex, it sounds like part of the innovation was not just technological, it was insights into people's behavior. So taking advantage of some of the advances in behavioral economics and psychology as well.
That's absolutely right. The reason that we were able to apply for a Stage 3 grant from DIV, as Mara described it, is because a great deal of investment had been made in rigorous randomized control trials to identify how this change in technology could interplay in interesting ways with people's behaviors. And we could say really credibly to USAID, this is very good value for money for you. We have good data to support that claim that really shows what's the causal effect of this new intervention. So I think it's actually quite a nice example of the whole story that Mara told about moving from pilots and small amounts of money, rigorous testing, and then investing to take a bet on scaling up something where you feel like you have some confidence in the value for money of the intervention.
So Brian and Nikhil, I'm wondering if you can tell us about what you're working on India to scale access to electricity.
So in India, we've got a population of about 400 million people who don't have access to electricity. And there's the typical grid or government response to that, which is extend the grid to provide service to these people. But the actual financial opportunity there is really actually quite poor. It's very expensive to extend a grid to a rural area to reach a population which is going to consume a very small amount of power and pay you very little, if anything. The private sector approach to that, the initial approach was always to take a product, a solar lantern, solar home system, put it in front of that customer and say, you're going to save money over kerosene, you're going to get a better service and buy this from me. But what we found when we started looking at this market was that actually the product approach wasn't working very well. Very few of the people who had access to that product were actually going to go out and buy it. And it wasn't necessarily that they couldn't afford it, but they weren't willing to. Because what you do when you take a product and you sell it, say you're going to sell it to someone, you're saying, pay me up front, and then if it fails, come back and buy another one from me. And when you're a poor person, that's really not a proposition you're really getting excited about. So we decided to take that risk, and instead of put it on the shoulders of the poor, we wanted to put it on ourselves as a company and provide lighting as a service or as a utility. So we are, as far as we know, the world's first lighting utility company. We designed a very low-cost microgrid. It is the lowest-cost microgrid in the world that provides lighting and phone charging, which are the priority services of the off-grid poor in India. And we do that at a very low cost to them, about 50 cents a week, a little less now that the rupee's depreciating as much as it is.
Great.
So where we came in,
Go ahead.
Just to say, so with the div, where we came in is we were stage 2, and we had proved concept on our own and demonstrated that there was demand in the market for this, that there was scalability, and what the div took the bet on with us was that we could do it. And with that div grant, in less time than it was needed, we actually achieved 75% greater the target than we had meant to with the div money, and since then have become attractive to investors, which has allowed us to raise our first capital. And now we're on course to serve 25,000 households by the end of this year.
Great. And what are your medium or longer term goals in terms of scaling this up?
Within India, we think we have the ability to scale up quite rapidly. But what we're also interested to do is see what other geographies this might make sense. We know that there are some states within India that we have a really great potential to serve. But we're looking at some other countries as well that might make sense for us. What we'd really like to say, we heard someone mention microfinance initially. And what you saw with microfinance was one organization prove a concept that was really replicable in a lot of different geographies, and you saw replication by a lot of other organizations and thereafter. And so what we see we're doing now is getting it to the point where microgrids or micro lighting utilities become that next microfinance. It is a replicable service that there's a large potential market for worldwide, and we're proving that it's commercially viable right now. Great.
So Vineet, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the role that the Omidyar network is playing in this space, and in particular the collaboration between the Omidyar network and the Development Innovation Ventures program.
Sure, very happy to. I mean, since we were set up, we have deployed over $600 million across both for-profit and non-profit organizations. And really what we look for are ideas and entrepreneurial teams who can have a positive impact at scale. So going to Tom's question, we're looking for things that will really help people improve their own lives at a level of millions. And so we're always sort of keenly looking out for better business models or better sort of technology innovations. And there's one example that very happy to talk about where we've actually collaborated with DIV, and then I'm sure we can later on during the course of this talk about some of the really exciting future collaborations, which I'm sure Maura will also be sharing. So one of the companies that we invested in is a company called D-Light, and it's a low-cost solar lantern business. And it started up, and it faced the challenges that every startup has, which is you have to get a product that really works in the conditions that it's aiming for. You need to get your distribution platform sorted out, and you need to build a team. And you want to do that as quickly as possible while executing really, really, really well. And so we made this investment. We've been helping them. They've actually the bulk of their distribution is now in Africa. They're shipping about 400,000 units a month. They've reached 15 million people. And their target is to sort of sextuple that by the end of this decade. They want to reach 100 million people by 2020. A really interesting innovation where D-Light worked with DIV was in East Africa, where some of the challenges, which I think it was Nikhil who was mentioning, were around affordability, around the trust factor, because these are by our standards very low-cost lanterns, but by the target population standards, that's still a big spend that the company is asking people to make. East Africa has this the mobile money payment system. So D-Light worked with DIV to really pilot a scheme whereby you can take an SMS and a SIM card and use that, install it in a solar lantern so that the customer can pay as you go. It immediately reduces the initial outlay that they have to make, and it also builds up trust factor. And it also protects the company's perspective, because if the customer's not paying, that light gets switched off. And that has really been helpful in driving this sort of sales growth. And it's really getting fantastic customer traction. So as I mentioned, it's more than 400,000 units a month, 15 million people, almost 3 million school kids who can do this. I mean, the productivity gains for the population that we're trying to help are immense.
Great. Robin, do we have any questions yet from Twitter?
Actually, we just got one in that follows well on what Vineet just said, as well as the great story about scaling with private sector capital that Marigao told us about. So this question came in asking about, specific to the DIV program that Maura and others have been talking about, how is private sector involvement continuing to evolve? And so that might be something that Vineet, you might want to speak to, but I'm sure Maura, you have thoughts as well.
Vineet, why don't you take the first crack at it?
It's something that we actually think about a lot. So the approach we tend to take is we look at the innovation, we look at the team, and then the question we sort of try and solve for is, what's the path to scale? Is this through the public good mechanism? Is it through the private sector? What will be a sustainable solution? And so we're actually completely agnostic. We don't try and force a for-profit solution into something. We don't try and force a non-profit solution. We sort of start with the idea and the innovation. And as it turns out, and this is not by design, as it turns out of our $611 million, about 50-50 has been for-profit and non-profit organizations. But we do see a real complementarity between them, and this is from the perspective of how do you support really early stage innovation where for-profit risk capital can sometimes be in shorter supply, and there's a really powerful role for government, as well as even now, I think going forward, Maura, I don't know if you want to sort of share a little bit more about the new incarnation that you're cooking up.
Yeah, so I will. I'll just add something to Vineet. We actually did, by design, put in the development innovation ventures that even at that proof of concept, even at that stage one, you had to convince us that this was going to scale without long-term U.S. taxpayer support. And the way you could do it is either through the private sector, i.e. somebody who's willing to pay for it. So Marigao in India, they're getting people, and D-Light is getting people to actually pay. They just came up with a business model, much like Steve Jobs did for music, where you pay as you go and you pay in the increments that you want, rather than the whole album that you never wanted in the first place. And so that's what they're doing to lighting in India and Africa. And so we think that private sector, both large companies, but a lot of scrappy entrepreneurs, like you see these terrific guys in India, are just the source of enormous breakthrough innovations. So we believe that the private sector has huge opportunities to intervene. On global development, we actually have been so excited about the kind of responses we got in our launching here in the U.S. of the Global Innovation Ventures that we have partnered with Prime Minister Cameron and the UK government, as well as Omidyar, to create a global platform. Much like, think about if we were the people who created first clinical trials back 100 years ago, and then that became the gold standard for the world. So we are enormously excited that other development agencies, some of the smartest investors like Omidyar, some of the foundations like the Skoll Foundation and the Gates Foundation are coming on board and saying this is a terrific way to source ideas from everywhere and scale up what works.
Great. So I wanted to ask Alex to jump in at this point, because really within the field of development economics, particularly in the last 10 years, there's just been a revolution in our understanding of what works and why. And I'm wondering if you could give our viewers a sense for that, and then what are some other examples of low-cost, effective interventions that you're most excited about, in addition to the work that you're doing on safe drinking water?
Thanks, Tom. Yes, a little, my background and actually how I know Tom is that I'm a recovering academic myself, and I used to be on the faculty at UC Berkeley. When I was still doing research, I was fortunate enough to be involved with I think it's safe to call it a revolution in development economics, where a group of researchers based at MIT and at Harvard and at Innovations for Poverty Action really took on the fatigue and cynicism in foreign aid and development that we have no idea what works. There's fashions and fads. One day it's health, the next day it's energy, the next day it's microfinance. What really works to dramatically improve the lives of the poor? And working with randomized controlled trials, like what Mara has been talking about in the field of medicine, enormous advances have been made to identify interventions that do actually demonstrably provide value for money for donors, donors and governments. So one good example of an intervention that's well supported by evidence is school-based deworming. That's what I'm here to talk to the House of Representatives Foreign Affairs Committee about today, as another very high-value, cost-effective intervention that we understand how to do, and we understand the evidence that underlies it. Chlorine dispensers is another example. But there's lots of things where we think we have great evidence for, and that we haven't gotten a chance to scale them up yet. To give you one example of something I'm very excited about, it's putting signs in public transport to remind people to tell their drivers to slow down and to drive sensibly. That's been demonstrated in randomized control trials to have dramatic benefits in Kenya, for example. Wouldn't it be great if insurance companies, as a source of private sector resources, help to scale up that kind of public health intervention? You might be hearing from us about other ideas like that in the future. Right.
And the development economists have also discovered that in some instances, like the school-based deworming, if you try to ask the relevant population to pay for it, that you actually do get reduced uptake of that intervention. So it's definitely not the case that in all instances we're going to be able to scale these interventions through a private sector delivery route.
Yes, that's exactly right, and which is part of the reason why we really need to search so hard for things that are super duper cheap. Deworming drugs are pennies a dose and are provided for free by the pharmaceutical companies. Donor money can be quite catalytic and targeted to unlock the technical assistance that's needed to provide those drugs at large scale. In India, we estimate that about $1 of donor resources that flows through Deworm the World, our partner organization, leverages something like $15 to $20 of Indian government money. So it's a really good investment from the perspective of value for money of foreign aid. And even with the chlorine dispensers, our cost recovery strategy and part of our path to sustainability isn't through trying to collect user fees from people, like in the solar examples that my colleagues and friends here have given. In fact, what we're doing is we are figuring out how to sell carbon credits associated with the averted emissions because people are chlorinating their water instead of burning wood. So we're leveraging private sector resources and private money, but it's not from the users, it's from people in Europe or in the US who want to make their companies or their businesses carbon neutral. So we can really be creative in figuring out how to leverage the private sector.
Mm-hmm.
Hey,
Great.
Tom, could I just add something to that deworming? Because maybe everybody watching doesn't really know what deworming is. So a lot of kids don't come to school every day in the developing world. And we used to think conventional wisdom was their parents were having them work in the field, the girls were menstruating, there were other reasons. It turns out that kids just wake up feeling lousy because they've drank dirty water or food that's contaminated, and they end up with intestinal worms. So some smart academics found that if you gave them one deworming pill a year, sometimes once every 6 months, that actually had dramatic impacts. 25% reduction in school absenteeism. They stayed in school longer. Years later, they made a lot more money. And so this is an example where the conventional wisdom of why these kids weren't going to school and why without evidence and the behavioral kind of economics that you had referred to, Tom, would have sent us in a completely different direction. And now a very simple intervention that costs pennies can have this dramatic reduction in absenteeism and give these kids a real fighting chance to stay in school and to realize their full potential as they get out in the workplace. So that's the kind of stuff we're on the hunt for every day, and deworming is an outstanding example of that.
And one intervention leads to improvements not only in health outcomes but in educational outcomes as well.
That's right.
Okay.
And in future wages as these kids become adults, which is economic growth too.
Right. A threefer. So Brian and Nikhil, you both talked about the importance of private sector investment in allowing your intervention to scale. But would you have been able to attract private sector investment in day one, or did you need some additional support from governments or foundations or philanthropists to really demonstrate the model before you were able to attract private sector investment?
Sure. I'll start. In fact, we pitched to a number of investors, one of which is on this Google Hangouts, and we won't name names. But no, the response was very typical, and it was across the board the same. It was come back to us when you have more traction, which makes sense. What we had at that time was something on paper, and we had one village out in the middle of nowhere that was receiving service. And while that's really exciting, it was really exciting for us, it's not enough to get someone to put hard-earned money behind it that has to generate a return. And that's really what investors have to do. They have to put money where they're going to get more money back. That's their job. What made a lot of sense then was for Div was to say, okay, we're going to take a gamble on these guys. We're going to take a gamble on this idea and see if it actually can reach that potential. And so the grant funding was actually a necessity in our case. But what we're really excited about is the fact that it had a short-lived tenure, in that we were able to transition from grant funding to private funding, because when you're looking only at grant funding, you can get $200,000 this year and maybe $150,000 next year, and maybe on a good year you're getting $400,000, but the next year you're getting zero. That's not a financial flow that's going to get you the scale you want. When you're looking at the private sector and private financial flows, if you have a good business model, you can scale up every year on year, and that scalability is what was really important for us. So I think this combination between Omidyar and Div is actually a really interesting idea, and one that I think has a lot of potential to take really early stage but innovative ideas and transition them to be scalable businesses.
And what were
What's
the
also
types of milestones that you had to reach and show to be able to then attract the follow-on investments?
well, one thing that's what was interesting is, as we had talked about in the beginning, is we're a service. We're not a product. So 2 years ago, when we were shopping around for investors to get interest, we didn't have that widget that we could show them how it works, what it does. It was a concept as a service and something that hadn't been tried before, and a model of collections based on the microfinance sector. So what really was the clincher is once we not only had a prototype, but had a network by which we could demonstrate a user base that could talk to investors. And when we finally able to seal the deal on our investment, it was after their team not only came and just visited our facilities, but stayed with our employees, met everybody, went and talked to customers, saw the lights, saw the process. And once they could see on the ground what it was we were doing and the extent by which, what I like to do is show people that when you turn the lights on in one village, you see villages all around you that now have lights on. You're surrounded by villages that are lit. And that really clenched it. And without the startup capital that we effectively received from DIV, we wouldn't have had that demonstration to show to people.
Great. Vineet, what do you see as some of the other potentially scalable business models for providing products and services or sustainable livelihoods for the poor?
Oh, great, great question. I mean, there is a ton of creativity out there, and I think that's one reason why we're building up teams that to be much closer to the geographies that we want to work in. So we have a team of I think now perhaps 16 people based in India. We're building up a team in South Africa who would cover all of Africa. We're starting to do more work in Latin America, and so the ideas are coming from lots of different angles. One just off the top of, I'll give you two examples actually. One is Bridge International, which is a very, very low-cost school business that is really aiming to try and figure out a business model where it can deliver a well-managed provision of education at tremendous scale, but keep it at a very low unit cost so that it's affordable for parents who don't have a lot of money. And that is growing. It's growing very rapidly. It has hugely ambitious targets it has set for itself. And if that model can be shown to work and deliver quality at low cost, we think that will be a very, very sort of strong transformation. Another example, and actually this is of innovation, is one of a company we recently invested in, which has identified a credit gap for people perhaps in the middle quintiles of the population, where to build up a credit, until you've got a credit history, you can't get credit, and if you don't get credit, you don't get credit. It's a vicious circle. So some folks have saying, okay, well, let's see if we can build up algorithms which can look at analyze the social networks of people, and off the back of that, build up an indication of credit score, and then let's start to, actually put our money where the mouth is and lend. Right. And this would help these people then become bankable. We're really excited about where that's going. So, I mean, those are just two examples from two very different parts of the world.
That's great. So, Robin, any more?
Sorry, go ahead.
Any more questions from Twitter that have come in?
So we actually, there's a lot of excitement about the partnership that Vineet and Maura have talked about with the USAID, Omidyar, and the UK about the new global platform. And one of these questions are, how do innovators and the private sector engage with this going forward?
Well, we still have the USAID DIV window open every day of the year. So while we're developing that and getting the global platform open for business, we hope that you'll go to usaid.gov/div, D-I-V. But please contact Vineet, myself, Div, Michael Kremer, any of us, and we'd be happy to continue the conversation. If you're a private equity firm, if you're an official development investor, if you are a venture capitalist, or you're an entrepreneur that wants to participate in some way. So we hope that it will actually expand the platform for both loans and venture banking and a whole lot of tools that will expand the offerings of DIV. Vineet, did you want to add anything?
No, I think just I would echo what Maura just said. I mean, I think we're going to be working hard to try and get this over the line and open for business as soon as we possibly can. I was in design calls earlier today, so.
Great. One question that I wanted to ask all of our participants is that there's a lot of interest on the part of young people in getting involved in global development, in becoming the next generation of Alex Swaneys and Maura O'Neills. So I'm wondering, maybe starting with Alex, what advice do you have for young people who are really interested in global development and are attracted by this approach that you all have been articulating of finding stuff that works, finding creative ways to scale up those innovations so that we don't just have pilot projects, but we have innovations that are making a difference in the lives of millions or even tens of millions of people.
Thanks, Tom. Yes, we had a saying. I used to work at the Gates Foundation where we had a saying that pilots never fail and never scale. And what's great about this group of folks here and the IV is saying, yeah, that's step one. We got to move on beyond that and got to take risks, and sometimes things might fail. So I think actually that's part of one of my first pieces of advice is take a few risks. Be willing to try things out, be part of a startup, be rolling up your sleeves, and especially early on in your career, don't try to rush for the office job right away, and don't try to rush to be in decision-making authority right away. Be part of a team, taking some risks and trying stuff out. Practically speaking, the Innovations for Poverty Action website often has a ton of jobs for sort of entry-level people, and I really encourage folks to check that out. You'll see that they've got a lot of interest in people who know something about statistics and Stata and those kind of computer programs too. So I'll close by saying don't be afraid to take some math in college and statistics. That stuff will really come in handy if you want to be in the world of evidence-based development.
So it's not the dismal science then?
No, this is where all the good stuff is happening, I'm telling you.
Great. Okay, Brian and Nikhil, what advice would you have for young people who are interested in getting involved in these types of efforts?
Well, the first I'd say get your hands dirty. So go out to where the problems are, go and live there, see it. We came up with our idea by actually really embedding ourselves and observing what was needed, what was affordable, what people wanted. And that is far better than watching it, from afar and diagnosing a problem without actually talking to who your beneficiaries or your customers are going to be. Don't be afraid. Jump right in. I mean, between Nikhil and I, we've probably got a few dozen years of schooling behind us, and not a lot of it is actually applied in our daily jobs right now.
Okay. Maura?
The only thing I'd add to them is, what I think Alex said is get out there and try something, take some risks. Brian said get it on the field. Those are absolutely key. But I also think iterate and learn quickly. Sometimes in development what we've done is made 5-year plans or long terms. The fact of the matter is that what Silicon Valley recognizes, it's the ability to tweak on a daily basis or weekly basis or certainly month, because oftentimes it just takes a little tweak and you hit that inflection point. Back to Steve Jobs. Listen, Napster taught us all to download music. We knew how to do that. There were MP3 players, but he just tweaked it a little bit, i.e. got us that 99 cents per song download, and it finally hit the inflection curve. So take risks, get your hands dirty, and continue to iterate quickly till you hit that sweet spot.
Right, and I should say for our viewers, for those of you in the development field who have not read a book by Eric Ries on lean startups, that it's definitely worth reading and learning about the sort of methodology for rapid iteration. Vineet, any closing thoughts?
Sure. I think I would definitely echo the points that have been made. That innovate, learn fast. I mean, what we like about market-based models is there's an honesty about them, because you have to be doing something that works to get your customer to part with their money, and the poor are justifiably pretty demanding consumers. And even when you see, oh, such and such business is growing, that just opens up a space to innovate and beat them. So for us, we're really interested in how do you help sectors to grow so that there's a space for competition. The last thing would be know the problem. Really immerse yourself in the problem and look at solutions from a different angle. There's a fantastic story of a business that came out that has been set up in South Africa, where it was a person from a very disadvantaged background. In the apartheid regime days, they would have been labeled, they were a colored person, would have been the old sort of nomenclature. This guy had been unemployed for 5 or maybe 7 years, long-term unemployed. He went to somebody and said, what do I do? And the guy who runs the accelerator said, look, you're an expert. If in any business you had 5 to 7 years worth of experience, you could be a consultant. Think, you know what it's like to be long-term unemployed. What would help you get out of it? And this guy went and he set up a mobile-based platform, a business called Ulzi. 2 million job searches happen on that a month. And this came out of a disadvantaged population on the outskirts of a city in South Africa. That's what's possible.
Great. Well, I want to thank everyone for taking time out of your busy schedule to save the world, to share with our viewers some of the exciting things that are going on, to find market-based solutions to global poverty alleviation, and to really bring the best of both the Silicon Valley entrepreneurial spirit and the rigorous evaluation to find out what works, to identify some of these solutions that we just heard really can come from everywhere, and keep up the good work. And I also want to encourage our viewers to suggest ideas for future We the Geeks Google Hangouts. So drop us a note at hashtag We the Geeks, and look forward to talking to everyone soon.
And just one last note on that, if anyone missed part of today's Hangout or you want to share it with others, there will be an archived video that is going to be on whitehouse.gov/wethegeeks. You'll be able to find it there and share it. So please go and please let us know what we should be talking about in the future. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.